New York, September 2024. A shocking announcement was broadcast from the Queens District Attorney's Office. Haiyan Deng, 33 years old, a Chinese woman, officially pleaded guilty to murdering her lover in a case that occurred 3 years ago. Many details had been left unanswered for a long time, but now, as the truth is revealed, the public is left in shock. A secret affair, a scheme for financial gain, and a crime hidden for years. Haiyan Deng not only committed murder, but also used her unborn child to manipulate her lover, attempting to force him to divorce and pay a huge sum of money. When she failed, she ruthlessly killed him. What drove this woman to such extremes? How did she manage to evade capture for 3 years? Like and subscribe to our channel as we uncover the full details of this shocking case. 5 p.m. September 23, 2024, to state of New Mexico. A regular afternoon on Interstate 40, near the town of Edgewood. Patrol Officer Rebecca Lane was on her usual shift when she spotted a silver SUV parked by the roadside. Inside was an Asian woman with a worried expression. As Rebecca approached, the woman, speaking limited English, explained that her tire was flat and she was waiting for a friend to help. Rebecca offered assistance, but the woman quickly refused, insisting she would be fine. Not wanting to pressure her, Rebecca returned to her patrol car, assuming it was a minor issue. However, hours later, during her night patrol, Rebecca was stunned to see the same SUV still there. The woman remained by the roadside, now looking even more anxious. Something was wrong. This time, Rebecca decided to stop and approach. She gently asked, "You're still here? Is your friend reliable? Is he bringing the tire?" The woman looked confused, slowly pulled out her phone, pointed at a location on the screen, and asked, "Can you take me here?" Rebecca immediately hesitated. The destination was near the US-Mexico border, an area notorious for smuggling, human trafficking, and organized crime. This was too risky. Unsure whether the woman was truly in trouble or hiding something, Rebecca's instincts as a cop made her cautious. She decided to check the SUV before doing anything else. If needed, she would take the woman to a safe location in town and call for roadside assistance. Following protocol, Rebecca reported the vehicle's license plate to dispatch. She had no idea that within seconds, a shocking truth would emerge. On the other end, the dispatcher's voice came through. "This Pennsylvania license plate matches a vehicle on the National Wanted list. The suspect is linked to a homicide in New York, identified as Haiyan Deng." Rebecca's eyes locked to the woman standing before her. Was she just a stranded traveler? Or a cold-blooded murderer on the run? Worse yet, Rebecca's radio was on speaker mode. The woman had undoubtedly heard everything. Despite her limited English, she recognized the words, "New York." No further explanation was needed. The woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes darted nervously, revealing her rising tension. Officer Rebecca Lane remained calm, pretending to continue assisting with the flat tire. She adjusted her tone to avoid alarming the woman, while subtly trying to stall for time by engaging in casual conversation. Moments later, sensing danger, the woman began showing signs of nervousness. She clutched her coat collar, shivered slightly, and stammered, "It's so cold. I need to get another jacket from my car." Rebecca didn't take her eyes off her. A fall night in New Mexico wasn't cold enough for that. She immediately understood. The woman was either trying to escape or retrieve something from the car. "Stay right there. I'll get your jacket for you." Rebecca stepped forward, blocking the car door. Her voice remained calm, but her sharp gaze delivered an unspoken warning. The woman froze. Then suddenly, her demeanor shifted completely. From shivering with cold, she became agitated, her face flushing with anger. She yelled in broken English, "Why won't you let me in my car? I did nothing wrong." Her voice was sharp, her hands flailing wildly. Rebecca stood her ground, not moving an inch. "Calm down. I just want to make sure you're safe." But the woman refused to listen. In a panic, she lunged at Rebecca, trying to reach the car door. She yanked at the handle, but it was locked. At this point, there was no doubt she was attempting to flee. Rebecca immediately grabbed her radio. "I need backup. Suspect is trying to escape." The woman became even more aggressive, forcing Rebecca to pull out her handcuffs, deciding to arrest the suspect on the spot. But the woman didn't go down easily. As Rebecca grabbed her arm, she broke free, shoving Rebecca, and fought back fiercely. A struggle broke out right on the highway. Cars continued speeding by, engines roaring, drowning out the woman's screams. "Stay down!" Rebecca shouted, trying to restrain the suspect, but she continued to fight back wildly. While Rebecca struggled to restrain the suspect, a passerby witnessed the scuffle and quickly pulled over. A middle-aged man stepped out of his pickup truck and rushed in to assist the officer. 2 against 1. Finally, with the stranger's help, Rebecca managed to subdue the suspect. Immediately after, her eyes turned toward the silver SUV. A nationally wanted fugitive stood before her. So what could be inside the car? Inside, there was a strange, pungent smell, a mix of sweat, cheap perfume, and something that resembled gunpowder. Sure enough, on the passenger seat lay a loaded handgun. Additionally, the police found a box of cash, fake documents, and a shattered phone. Within hours, footage of the arrest spread rapidly across social media. Haiyan's social media accounts were dug up, revealing images of her flaunting a lavish lifestyle, extravagant parties, luxurious vacations, and designer goods. The glamorous Instagram persona starkly contrasted with her disheveled appearance at the time of her arrest. The heavily edited photos made many wonder, if not for the license plate, would the police have even recognized her? She had traveled thousands of miles, nearing the Mexican border, where U.S. security checks were notoriously lax. If she had abandoned the car and crossed on foot, she could have completely disappeared. But instead of acting like a professional fugitive, Haiyan chose to stand by the roadside, in the dead of night, waiting for someone. So what exactly was she running from, and what sentence did she face? Let's take a deeper look into her story. Born on January 30th, 1990, in a poor village in Guangdong, China, Haiyan Deng grew up dreaming of escaping poverty, like many young people in the region. Moving abroad, earning money, and sending it home to build a house, that was the path many villagers chose, regardless of whether the means were legal or not. In late 2015, Haiyan entered the US on a B2 tourist visa. But everyone knew she wasn't there for sightseeing. Her first destination after landing wasn't a hotel or a relative's house, but Flushing, New York, the heart of the Chinese immigrant community. There, Haiyan began her career in the flower-selling industry. With her attractive face and slim figure, she quickly caught the attention of high-end nightclubs. Initially, she was just a hostess, but thanks to her charm and ambition, Haiyan climbed the ranks to become a manager, a madam. Her job now wasn't just entertaining clients, but managing a team of hostesses, arranging VIP customers, and taking a cut of the profits. Money flowed in, and her lifestyle became increasingly extravagant. But there was one big problem: her tourist visa had expired. Choosing to stay illegally, Haiyan entered a world full of risks and violence, where without a solid footing, she could be swept away at any moment. Women like Haiyan didn't just have to evade law enforcement, but also had to contend with criminal gangs within the Chinese community. In Flushing, there was an unspoken rule: either be strong or be prey. It was a dangerous game, but Haiyan adapted. She became a crucial link in Flushing's underground business network, knowing how to gain favor with powerful figures while being ready to betray them when necessary. Despite living in the US for over 5 years, Haiyan Deng never learned to speak English. Whether it was a lack of ability or sheer laziness, her poor language skills were evident in her clumsy, broken sentences during her arrest. Her entire world revolved around Flushing, where she could easily navigate life in Chinese, work, and socialize without integrating into American culture. But on social media, Haiyan crafted a completely different image. On TikTok, she appeared as a wealthy, stylish socialite, posting numerous videos flaunting cash and designer goods. She even uploaded videos of herself practicing shooting at a gun range. Ironically, what seemed like mere showmanship would later become a crucial element in her murder case. Just as everything seemed to be going her way, the COVID-19 pandemic struck, delivering a severe blow to the nightlife industry and causing Haiyan's income to plummet. But financial struggles weren't her biggest fear. Her greatest concern was her illegal status in the US. The US government was tightening immigration policies. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, crackdowns became more frequent, particularly targeting illicit brothels. To solve this problem, most women in Haiyan's situation chose the same solution, marrying a US citizen. According to a former roommate, in just 2 years, Haiyan had cycled through at least 10 boyfriends. Most were former clients. But these relationships never lasted. In the nightlife scene, men liked to rescue good girls and encourage bad girls to reform, but none wanted a long-term commitment. They might enjoy the thrill, but the moment they sensed a risk of responsibility, they would disappear. Haiyan was no exception. She repeatedly failed to secure a stable relationship, until she met Justin Lee, a man 5 years younger than her. Looking back, Justin Lee's parents were also immigrants from Fujian. They worked hard in Flushing, living frugally so they could eventually open a large Chinese restaurant in East New York. Thanks to their cooking skills and sharp business sense, they gradually escaped poverty, eventually obtaining green cards and bringing their son to the US from China. But Justin Lee was nothing like his parents. He was pampered from a young age, growing up in luxury. To make up for their years of separation, his parents spared no expense on their son. They bought him designer clothes, enrolled him in expensive private schools, and allowed him to live the life of a spoiled rich kid. Unlike most men who frequented nightclubs in search of young women, Justin was more interested in older, more experienced women. That was precisely why he was drawn to Haiyan Deng, and from this moment, Haiyan saw her chance for a better life. With a wealthy, generous man who was infatuated with her, Haiyan saw Justin Lee as an opportunity she couldn't afford to miss. She dedicated all her efforts to winning Justin over, making him feel special and unable to leave her. But the happy times didn't last long. Haiyan discovered a truth that posed a major obstacle to her plans. Despite being young, Justin Lee was already married with 2 children. His wife was a 22-year-old woman, and they had been married for 4 years. Determined not to lose her grip, Haiyan continued to pull Justin closer. She gave him her full attention, doing everything possible to maintain their relationship. She even started publicly posting intimate moments with Justin on social media. Haiyan's posts painted the picture of a devoted couple, despite the fact that Justin had never made any long-term promises to her. But no matter how hard Haiyan tried, Justin had no intention of leaving his wife and children. Meanwhile, Haiyan realized she had invested too much time, money, and emotion into Justin without getting the outcome she desired. The situation escalated when Haiyan discovered she was pregnant. She then demanded that Justin divorce his wife and marry her. Instead of panicking or making a quick decision, Justin remained cold and non-committal, delaying any response. Haiyan's frustration grew. She knew she couldn't continue working in nightclubs with her pregnancy becoming more obvious. So she started increasing the pressure on Justin, frequently faking stomach pains to keep him by her side. But Justin Lee's wife wasn't fooled. His Mexican wife hired a private investigator to track her husband's activities and quickly discovered Haiyan's apartment. Without hesitation, the wife decided to take action. She showed up at Haiyan's apartment unannounced. The moment she saw her husband's mistress, she lunged at her. Haiyan, not one to back down, fought back fiercely. A violent altercation erupted between the two women, one the legal wife and the other the pregnant mistress. Justin Lee was completely helpless, unable to intervene. Haiyan's terrified roommate, witnessing the chaos, immediately called the police. The police arrived quickly, breaking up the fight and arresting all three involved. However, since Haiyan couldn't afford bail, she was held in custody for a few days. Due to her illegal residency status, she was required to report to immigration authorities regularly and was prohibited from going near Justin Lee's wife. Without a stable income, Haiyan was forced to return to working in nightclubs, but this time, she had to constantly change locations to avoid detection. Her life became filled with anxiety and instability, far from the luxurious lifestyle she once had. As her pregnancy advanced, so did her financial needs. She realized that Justin Lee would never divorce his wife to marry her. So, instead of clinging to a hopeless love, Haiyan bluntly demanded $500,000 from Justin Lee. She called it compensation for emotional distress and wasted time spent with him. She promised that, if he paid the money, she would take care of the pregnancy and disappear from his life forever. However, Justin Lee, who had been spoiled all his life, had never been forced to make such a significant decision on the spot. He didn't want to lose money, but he also wasn't brave enough to cut ties with Haiyan completely. They continued negotiating, but the bargaining dragged on without resolution. Tensions escalated, and every meeting turned into a heated argument. Then, suddenly, on September 19, 2021, Justin Lee vanished without a trace. The police in Queens, New York, received a missing person report. The one who filed it was Justin Lee's wife. But unlike most missing person cases, she had a strong suspicion of where her husband might be. A few days before his disappearance, Justin and his wife had a heated argument at home. She had discovered that he was still secretly seeing Haiyan. Enraged, Justin Lee stormed out of the house without saying a word. He also turned off his phone, cutting off all contact. His wife suspected that he had gone to Haiyan for comfort. This wasn't the first time, but this time, 3 days had passed with no news, which was unusual. Even Justin's parents were unable to reach him. Sensing something was wrong, his wife finally decided to report him missing to the police. Understanding the situation, the police dispatched 2 officers to Haiyan's apartment to investigate. As soon as they stepped into the hallway, a faint, strange odor lingered in the air. Haiyan's roommate informed them that she hadn't seen Haiyan for 2 days. The door to Haiyan's bedroom was locked from the inside. The officers knocked multiple times, but there was no response. Left with no other choice, they decided to break down the door. The scene inside left them stunned. On the bed, a human-shaped object was tightly wrapped in a bedsheet. Blood stains had dried on the mattress, indicating that the incident had happened hours earlier. The overwhelming stench was suffocating. There was no doubt. Forensic experts were immediately called to the scene. When the sheet was removed, the body of a male victim was revealed. His body was covered in bruises, showing signs of an attack. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Based on the level of decomposition and rigor mortis, forensic experts estimated the time of death to be between 24 and 48 hours earlier. All valuables had been taken from the victim. The police reviewed the building's parking lot security cameras. Footage showed that 3 nights earlier, Justin Lee had driven a white Audi to Haiyan's apartment. After that, he was never seen leaving the apartment. The following morning, the camera captured a woman wearing a face mask leaving the apartment. She drove the white Audi away and never returned. Her body shape and facial features were unmistakable. It was Haiyan Deng. But now, Haiyan was also missing. The police immediately issued a nationwide arrest warrant. All evidence pointed to the fact that Haiyan had failed to reach a financial agreement with Justin Lee. In a fit of rage, she killed him, stole his belongings, and fled. The police visited the nightclub where Haiyan worked to gather information from her colleagues. Some witnesses reported that, days before the incident, Haiyan had asked about purchasing a gun. She claimed that there had been a rise in robberies targeting female hostesses and that she wanted a firearm for self-defense. Without proper documentation, Haiyan had to pay 3 times the market price to buy a handgun on the black market. The caliber and firing range of the gun matched the weapon used in Justin Lee's murder. Another critical detail emerged. Haiyan had told her colleagues that even if Justin agreed to give her money, she would not stay in the US. Her plan was to head north to Canada and start a new life. The police immediately alerted all US-Canada border checkpoints and intensified their search. But days passed, and there was still no trace of Haiyan. That's when the police realized a crucial detail. Without US citizenship, a green card, or legal documents, crossing into Canada was nearly impossible. It would be like walking straight into the hands of the authorities. They began to suspect that the Canada escape plan was a deliberate distraction. The real destination was likely the southern border, toward Mexico, where security was much more lenient. But if that were the case, why didn't she flee back to China? Haiyan's roommate revealed a shocking secret. Years ago, following the advice of a shady broker, Haiyan had destroyed her Chinese passport to apply for asylum. As a result, her asylum request was denied, and she lost her only form of identification. Without a passport, she couldn't board a flight back to China. At that moment, the police received a report from Pennsylvania linked to the case. It turned out that the white Audi Haiyan used to escape didn't belong to Justin Lee. In fact, it was registered to a friend of his named Mr. Wang. Due to his extravagant spending habits, Justin's parents had confiscated his car over the years. As a result, Justin had to borrow vehicles from friends to maintain his image. When Mr. Wang learned about Justin's disappearance, he checked the car's location using the GPS tracking system. He discovered that the vehicle was moving south along the interstate highway. Mr. Wang then remotely disabled the car, preventing it from starting. The vehicle was later abandoned in a parking lot in Houston, Texas. When the police arrived to inspect the car, they found a small amount of blood inside. Tests confirmed that it was Justin Lee's blood. Surveillance footage showed that when Haiyan realized the car had been locked, she appeared extremely distressed. She made multiple phone calls. A short while later, a middle-aged man arrived. He requested to remain anonymous, but later admitted to the police that he was a regular client of Haiyan. In a state of panic, Haiyan offered him a large sum of money to rent a car for her. The man believed Haiyan was fleeing from a gang. Driven by greed, he agreed to help. He rented a silver Honda CR-V and handed it over to Haiyan. The moment she received the car, she sped off, heading straight toward the Mexican border. After traveling 3,000 kilometers, when the vehicle suffered a flat tire, Haiyan's escape came to an end. The New Mexico police had just carried out one of the most dramatic arrests of the year. 2 months later, she was extradited back to New York to attend her first court hearing. In court, Haiyan remained completely silent, only denying the charges. But one detail shocked the public. Haiyan's pregnancy was visibly evident. A later report confirmed that she had given birth in April 2022. But who was the child's father? That remains an unsolved mystery. On September 18, 2024, the Queen's District Attorney officially announced that Haiyan Deng had pleaded guilty. Melinda C., the Queen's District Attorney, stated, "A life was senselessly taken, and the defendant now faces a long prison sentence for her actions." The court sentenced Haiyan Deng to 27 years in prison, bringing an end to the fugitive's 3-year run. Perhaps, if she had stayed in her homeland, none of this would have happened. This concludes the video. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can bring you more strange and emotional stories. In 1980, in the city of Ambato, Ecuador, a heavy rainstorm caused flooding that claimed the lives of hundreds of people. After the rain, rescue teams immediately searched through the debris to find the bodies of the unfortunate victims. Beneath the muddy ground, a rescuer was shocked to find a small hand sticking out from the earth. Digging deeper, they discovered 4 bodies hastily buried in mass graves. Initially, everyone assumed these were victims of the disaster. But when investigators arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed something unusual. The bodies appeared to have been underground before the flood swept through. The police immediately launched an investigation. This was not an accident, but a mass murder. But who was the killer? And why were the victims buried here? Like and subscribe to our channel to join us in uncovering the mystery. At the end of April 1980, in a small supermarket in Ambato, a man was caught attempting to kidnap a 12-year-old girl. His strange behavior immediately caught the attention of those around him. Maria, the 12-year-old girl, was shopping with her mother as usual. Just as they stepped into the store, a rough hand suddenly grabbed her shoulder and yanked her away in an instant. Maria's mother, Carvina Pobeda, immediately screamed in terror, struggling to take her daughter back. Nearby shopkeepers turned around, noticing the unusual situation, and immediately intervened. A crowd quickly gathered. Market vendors did not hesitate and rushed to restrain the strange man. A bystander quickly called the police to report the incident. Less than 15 minutes later, the local police arrived at the scene. When they arrived, the kidnapper's face showed no remorse. Instead, he smirked as if mocking the police. The man was escorted to the Ambato police station. His name was Pedro Alonso López, a name that no one knew then. But in just a few days, it would become a nightmare for all of South America. At the police station, investigators began interrogating him. Initially, they thought it was just a routine kidnapping case. But when the investigator mentioned the bodies found in the flood, Pedro's reaction made everyone shudder. He did not show fear or surprise. He simply stared at the investigator, smirked, and uttered a sentence that made the entire interrogation room fall silent. "Oh, so you finally found them?" There was no doubt. Pedro Alonso López knew something. Pedro Alonso López sat motionless in the interrogation room, staring at the 4 walls. Every question from the police was met with eerie silence. Hours later, an investigator came up with a bold idea. They needed a priest, someone even the most ruthless criminals might trust. Less than 30 minutes later, Father Córdoba Agudino, a well-respected priest in the community, was invited to the prison. As he entered, he sensed the tense atmosphere. Everyone was waiting to see if this method would work. Soon after, the priest placed his hand on Pedro's shoulder and gently asked, "Do you have something to confess?" Pedro looked up, his eyes flashing strangely. Pedro finally spoke. "My name is Pedro Alonso López." In the small interrogation room, Pedro talked all night. He recounted each case, each crime, each child, with eerie delight. As the first rays of dawn appeared, the prison door opened. Father Córdoba Agudino stepped out, his face pale. His hands trembled, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. Police officers rushed over. One of them asked, "Are you okay, Father?" But the priest only shook his head, his eyes filled with terror. In the interrogation room, Pedro López confessed to murdering over 300 innocent girls, at least 110 victims in Ecuador, 100 in Colombia, and over 100 in Peru. This truth left the entire investigative team speechless. Not stopping there, Pedro López even seemed delighted as he spoke about his twisted preferences. He said that Ecuadorian girls were his favorite targets because they were gentle, trusting, and carefree compared to the more suspicious women in Colombia. To better understand his motives and the origins of his cruelty, investigators traced Pedro López's past, step by step, uncovering the dark childhood and distorted thoughts that shaped his criminal path. Pedro Alonso López was born on October 8, 1948, in Tolima, Colombia, during one of the most chaotic periods in the country's history, the era of the La Violencia Civil War. Pedro Alonso López's childhood was filled with poverty, violence, and trauma. His father, Megdardo Reyes, was a poor farmer. He was murdered in the Civil War 3 months before Pedro was born. His mother, Benilda López de Castañeda, made a living as a prostitute in her own home. Their small house was not just a home, but also a place for her clients. The moans, laughter, and voices of strange men echoed through the rooms, becoming a haunting part of Pedro's childhood memories. Pedro was not an only child. He was one of 13 children, each with a different father. Benilde barely paid attention to her children. Whenever she did, it was usually to beat them mercilessly and scold them harshly. Pedro was often severely punished by his mother, suffering from her uncontrollable rage for reasons he could not understand. To her, violence was a way to teach discipline, but she had no idea that her abuse was nurturing a monster in the shadows. Years later, Pedro admitted to an investigator, "I never had a childhood. I only had darkness and demons in my head." Growing up in an environment filled with violence and crime, Pedro gradually lost his ability to feel human emotions. He had no friends, no one to teach him about love, and no one who cared about the deep wounds in his soul. In 1957, when Pedro was only 9 years old, an event occurred that changed his life forever. Benilde discovered that Pedro had engaged in inappropriate behavior with his younger sister. Enraged, she not only punished him harshly, but also made a heartbreaking decision. She threw him out of the house, forcing him into a life of wandering on the streets. In just one night, Pedro Alonso López became homeless. To survive, Pedro was forced to steal food, wander the streets, sleep under bridges, and rely on his wild instincts. But one day, he met a strange man, an old man who seemed kind, with sympathetic eyes. He reached out as if he wanted to save Pedro from misery and said, "Boy, you can't live like this forever. Come with me, and I will help you." The man took Pedro to what he called a home. But when they arrived, the boy was horrified to find it was just an abandoned house filled with trash and the stench of mold. Before Pedro could escape, the man revealed his true nature. He lunged at the boy, overpowering him with his brute strength. In the following days, Pedro suffered brutal abuse, enduring both physical and psychological torment. When the man had no more use for him, he heartlessly abandoned Pedro on the streets. From that moment, Pedro changed. He lost faith in humanity, and his heart was filled with hatred for the world. But that was just the beginning of his tragic journey. On the dangerous streets of Bogotá, Pedro continued to be a target for ruthless criminals. One day, while Pedro was wandering, malnourished, filthy, and with lifeless eyes, an American couple happened to see him. They slowly approached. The woman gently asked, "Son, where are you from? Where are your parents?" Pedro did not answer, but a faint glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes. It was the first time someone had shown concern for him. After talking for a while, the couple felt sympathy for him. They decided to take Pedro in and bring him home. For the first time in years, Pedro had a home. He was bathed, given clean clothes, and enjoyed delicious meals he had never tasted before. Not only that, but the couple also helped him enroll in school, where he learned to read, write, and make friends. Everything seemed to be improving, but the darkness in Pedro's mind did not disappear. The painful memories did not fade easily, and true happiness still felt out of reach. At school, Pedro remained cold and distant, despite some classmates trying to befriend him. During his first nights in a warm room, he would wake up startled from nightmares. Over time, Pedro began to feel uneasy, easily irritated, and suffocated by an environment with too many rules. He did not want to be controlled or ordered around. Pedro secretly stole money from his adoptive family and ran away once again, returning to the streets he had once sworn to leave behind. But this time, he was no longer a weak homeless child. Pedro understood that to survive, he had to make his own money. He tried to find his first job, but no one would hire him. Lacking experience, without identification papers, and most importantly, distrusted by everyone as a vagrant, he was left with no other options. With no choice, he began delving into the underground world. At first, he engaged in small-scale crimes like petty theft, scams, and stealing goods from markets. Gradually, Pedro became more skilled and sophisticated in his actions. He started gaining notoriety among street criminals. Several times, Pedro was temporarily detained by the police, but since he was still a minor, he was usually released after a few days. In 1969, at the age of 21, everything changed. Pedro was arrested in a Bogotá suburb while attempting a major robbery. But this time, he could not escape the law. For the first time in his life, Pedro was sentenced to 7 years in prison. On his first night in jail, Pedro became the target of older inmates. He was assaulted and treated brutally, once again becoming prey. Pedro's fury ignited, but instead of fear, he began plotting his revenge. He secretly fashioned a crude weapon, a small, sharpened blade made from a metal spoon. 2 weeks later, Pedro executed his plan. While his 2 attackers were off guard, he struck mercilessly, killing them both. As he watched their lifeless bodies on the floor, Pedro felt no guilt. Instead, an eerie sensation overtook his mind, a pleasure he had never experienced before. Pedro's sentence was extended by 2 more years, but since it was considered self-defense, his punishment was not significantly increased. During his time in prison, his resentment toward his mother deepened. Pedro gradually lost any sense of humanity, replacing it with a distorted view of the world. In the following years, Pedro was exposed to extreme pornography and violent materials, further feeding his twisted thoughts and obsessions. In 1978, Pedro Alonso López was released from prison. The years of confinement had stripped away any last trace of humanity in him. Upon gaining freedom, Pedro wandered through Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, searching for victims to satisfy his depraved urges. After months of observation, he realized that children between 8 and 12 years old often walked alone, with little protection from adults, and were easily swayed by promises. He moved through the indigenous tribes of Ayacucho, southern Peru, where children lived in poverty and lacked strict supervision from their families. To approach children, Pedro disguised himself as a street vendor, skillfully offering small gifts or making promises of work, candy, and presents. Things that made them feel safe, hopeful, and easy to trust. Once trapped, the victims would be led to remote places where no one could hear their cries for help. There, they faced unspeakable horrors, torture, abuse, and eventually murder. After each crime, he carefully erased the evidence, hiding the bodies in deserted areas to avoid detection. However, the increasing number of disappearances made people uneasy. Children vanished without a trace, and rumors began to spread. Fear gripped the region. People whispered about a predator lurking in the shadows of the mountains. Then a name began circulating, spreading through terrifying stories: the monster of the Andes. However, during one of his hunts, Pedro Alonso López made a mistake. In a northern Peruvian tribe, Pedro was caught in the act while attempting to lure a 9-year-old girl. A group of tribesmen immediately rushed in, restraining Pedro before he had a chance to escape. This time, they didn't wait for the authorities to intervene. They decided to punish the predator themselves. He was buried up to his neck in the ground, tightly bound, unable to move. They didn't stop there. They smeared honey on his face and body, attracting insects to torment him in the most painful way possible. Fire ants began crawling up, biting him bit by bit. Pedro screamed in agony, but no one felt pity for him. Meanwhile, an American missionary, a friend of the tribe, intervened just in time. She tried to convince them to stop. Punishing him this way won't make us any better than him. Eventually, the villagers agreed. They pulled Pedro out of the burial pit, tied him up, and handed him over to a nun, who later drove him to the authorities. But when the nun arrived at the police station, something unexpected happened. The authorities did not prosecute Pedro. Instead, they released him, simply escorting him to the Colombian border with a chilling warning: "If you come back, we will deal with you immediately." As soon as he returned to Ecuador, he resumed his killing spree, but this time, he was more careful than ever. The number of missing children grew, especially in rural areas, but no one could find any trace of the killer. Due to a lack of evidence and limited forensic technology, the police could not pinpoint a specific suspect. At that time, many believed that the disappearances were linked to human trafficking gangs. It wasn't until 1980 that a massive flood in Ambato, Ecuador, accidentally uncovered the horrifying truth. The powerful waters washed away the soil, revealing 4 buried children's bodies. When the police launched an investigation, they realized these children were not victims of a natural disaster. They had been murdered by a serial killer. Pedro once said he was obsessed with eyes. He believed he could see something special in his victims' eyes, a purity, something he never had himself. To Pedro, the eyes were a tool for selecting his prey. He sought out innocent, naive gazes, eyes that made him feel entitled to take that innocence away. But Pedro's biggest mistake was his arrogance. Just days after the flood disaster, he tried to lure a 12-year-old girl. At the police station, Pedro remained silent to all questions. He neither denied nor confessed, causing the investigation to reach a deadlock. At this point, Captain Cordoba decided to apply a special tactic. He disguised himself as a priest named Cordoba Agudino, approaching Pedro with empathy and sophisticated psychological techniques. Through slow, skillful conversations, Cordoba gradually gained Pedro's trust. Pedro began to open up, sharing his twisted thoughts. Eventually, Pedro started confessing to a series of crimes. However, the investigators remained skeptical. Was he lying to gain attention, like Henry Lee Lucas, who once claimed to have killed over 300 people without concrete evidence? They knew that serial killers sometimes exaggerated their number of victims to attract notoriety. But then, Pedro made an offer that shook their doubts. He agreed to lead the police to the locations where he had hidden the victims' bodies. Under strict supervision, the investigation team followed Pedro to a deserted area near Ambato, Ecuador. When the police began digging, what they found left everyone in shock. The remains of 53 children were unearthed one by one. All were between the ages of 8 and 12, murdered in the same cruel manner. Throughout that entire day, Pedro continued leading the investigators to 28 different locations. But when the police dug further, no more bodies were found. After returning to the police station, the investigators added the 53 newly discovered cases to the 4 previously confirmed cases, bringing the official total to 57 victims. An alarming number, but still far below Pedro's own claims. Nonetheless, with the number of bodies recovered, there was no longer any doubt. Pedro Alonso López was indeed one of the most ruthless serial killers in history. In 1981, Pedro Alonso López pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum penalty in Ecuador at the time. 16 years for over 100 lives, a sentence that outraged the public. Pedro remained imprisoned in Ecuador until 1994. But thanks to good behavior, he only served 14 of the 16 years. On the day of his release, Pedro seemed euphoric, cheering as if he had been granted a divine blessing. He thanked life, as if he were not a serial killer walking free. But his freedom didn't last long. Just 1 hour later, the police arrested him again for being a foreigner without legal documentation. At the Colombian court, the judge declared that Pedro was not legally responsible for his crimes due to his antisocial personality disorder. After being released from the hospital, Pedro moved to Espinal, Tolima, and disappeared in 1998. The public continued to ask, is Pedro Alonso López still alive and killing, or has someone else taken up where he left off? The answer remains unknown to this day. Thank you for following this story. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more terrifying and mysterious cases. Remember, no matter how horrifying the truth may be, it must be told so that justice is always upheld. The result of an unethical relationship between a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law. In 2023, Lai, now 18 years old, was caught in a dispute over a massive inheritance worth 500 million NT dollars. However, as soon as he received the entire fortune from his grandfather, a tragedy struck. Lai mysteriously passed away just 1 day after his father's funeral. The police could not determine whether it was a suicide or if there was foul play. From the beginning, investigators faced countless difficulties. The deeper they investigated, the more complex and unpredictable factors emerged, including a fake same-sex marriage used to protect the identities of certain family members. Did Lai truly die in an accident, or was there someone who planned his murder to seize the inheritance? The questions gradually unraveled as evidence began to surface. Subscribe to the channel and stay tuned to uncover this shocking mystery. At noon on January 4, 2023, the police in Baidun District, Taichung City, Taiwan, received an emergency call reporting a young man lying motionless on the street, having fallen from an upper floor. When the police and emergency responders arrived at the scene, they found that the victim showed no signs of life. Upon closer examination, investigators discovered a distinct dent beneath the victim's body, likely caused by the impact of a heavy object. This led them to suspect suicide by jumping. However, no identification documents were found. The most urgent task was to identify the victim. However, following protocol, the body was transported to the funeral home for preservation, awaiting forensic examination. While registering the body, the funeral home director suddenly recognized the deceased's familiar face. Upon recollection, the director was shocked to realize that just a few days ago, this young man had visited the funeral home to bid farewell to his grandfather. He was Lai, who attended the funeral as the direct grandson. The funeral home director immediately contacted Lai's mother to confirm the identity. Lai's mother, Mrs. Tran, was in shock upon receiving the news and rushed to the funeral home, confirming that the lifeless body was indeed her son. Within just 1 year, her family had to arrange 2 funerals, one for her father-in-law and one for her son. These tragedies devastated her spirit. Mrs. Tran's family lived on the 10th floor of an apartment building. That morning, her son was still healthy and had even purchased a new motorcycle to meet friends. But just a few hours later, he was gone forever. While she was preparing for her son's funeral, a stranger suddenly arrived holding a marriage certificate, demanding full inheritance rights as Lai's spouse. Mrs. Tran was stunned when she looked at the marriage document. Mrs. Tran recalled that, in the morning, her son was still healthy and had even purchased a new motorcycle to meet friends. But just a few hours later, he was gone forever. And the biggest revelation of all was the identity of Lai's spouse, a 24-year-old man named Chia. Something was definitely off because Chia was not a complete stranger in this case. He was on the 10th floor, the same apartment complex where Lai was found dead. Chia's father was a real estate lawyer who had handled the transfer of over 30 properties from Lai's grandfather, transferring them to his grandson. Despite coming from different backgrounds, Lai and Chia, being of the same age and having similar personalities, became close friends. But how did this friendship turn into love? In fact, Lai had always shown interest in women. He had frequently introduced girlfriends to his family. This raised many doubts in Mrs. Tran's mind. The situation became even more complicated when, after the incident, a woman suddenly came forward, claiming to be Chia's actual girlfriend. She and Chia had been in a relationship for nearly 2 years, a fact acknowledged by both friends and their families. What was already confusing became even more tangled. That morning, Mrs. Tran clearly remembered that her son had received a phone call from Chia, his newly registered spouse. Chia asked Lai to bring his identification documents and meet up to learn about real estate. But no one expected that this real estate lesson would quickly turn into a marriage. They didn't even have time to change clothes. There were no wedding outfits, no rings, no flowers. Their witness was just a random stranger they pulled off the street. Later, this witness recalled that Chia, the older man, had rushed up to him, pleading for help, saying their love was not accepted by both families. Out of sympathy and admiration, the witness agreed. And so, at 9 a.m. that day, they legally became spouses. According to the forensic report, Lai's estimated time of death was around 11 a.m., just 2 hours after the marriage. Since Lai did not leave a will, this meant that under legal provisions, Chia, as his lawful spouse, was entitled to inherit at least 250 million NT dollars from Lai's estate. But Chia was not the only one drawn by the lure of this fortune. Even before Lai's cause of death was determined, 4 other relatives of the Lai family appeared, each claiming inheritance rights. These individuals were the biological children of Lai's grandfather, making them Lai's uncles and aunts. All 4 claimed that their father's fortune had been entirely transferred to Lai, while the second generation, the biological children of their father, had received nothing. This made them all suspect that the will could be fake, as such favoritism seemed impossible. The police found themselves in a difficult situation when handling the case, and with the current clues they could not make any definitive conclusions. However, with years of experience handling family-related cases, investigators determined that focusing on family relationships would be the key to unlocking the truth. According to revealed information, Lai's grandfather and his legal wife had 3 daughters and 2 sons. However, the second son had intellectual disabilities, struggled with daily life, and even marriage and family life were seen as difficult challenges. To resolve this issue, Lai's grandfather spent money on an international marriage brokerage service to find a wife for his son. In 1999, he paid a large sum to marry an Indonesian woman. After the marriage, she received monthly financial support from Lai's grandfather, but in reality, she was more of a caretaker for his second son. Soon after, she gave birth to a daughter for the Lai family. But because Lai's grandfather desperately wanted a male heir, he developed a dark plan. He decided to father a child himself, forcing his daughter-in-law to bear a son to continue the bloodline. This plan failed when the woman refused to engage in such an unethical relationship. She chose to divorce to save herself. However, Lai's grandfather did not give up. Sometime later, he found a Chinese woman, Mrs. Tran, and arranged for her to marry his son. Eventually, she stayed with the Lai family and gave birth to a boy, Lai, the future heir of the family's vast fortune. The dark secrets of the Lai family were exposed in 2006 when Lai's grandfather's legal wife accidentally caught her husband and daughter-in-law in bed together. More precisely, that day, when she returned from the market, she found the house door locked from the inside and heard incoherent female moaning sounds. Suspecting something was wrong, she climbed up the ventilation opening to look inside. What she saw left her stunned. Her own husband was having an affair with their daughter-in-law. Normally, a woman in such a situation would cause a scandal. But because her life depended entirely on her husband, she chose to turn a blind eye. 9 months later, Lai was born. By simply looking at him, she noticed he bore an uncanny resemblance to her husband rather than to her son. To confirm her suspicions, she secretly conducted a DNA test. As expected, Lai was indeed the result of her husband's illicit relationship with their daughter-in-law. In other words, the man Lai called father was actually his half-brother, and the man he called grandfather was, in fact, his biological father. Betrayed time and time again, she could no longer endure the situation and decided to file a lawsuit against Lai's grandfather and his daughter-in-law, accusing them of adultery. While awaiting trial, Lai's grandfather decided to go all in and no longer hide his actions. He brazenly expelled his legal wife from the house, an act that immediately angered the rest of the children. All of them, who were mentally and physically healthy, stood by their mother and condemned their father as a shameless man who had destroyed moral order. Lai's grandfather did not take this lightly and expelled anyone who spoke ill of him from the family home. In the end, in the massive family estate, only his intellectually disabled son, his daughter-in-law with whom he had an affair, and Lai, the boy who was legally his grandson but was actually his son, remained. For reasons unclear, whether out of deep affection or obsession, Lai's grandfather gradually transferred all of his assets and properties to the boy, who was then still an infant. Due to the undeniable DNA evidence, the court found Lai's grandfather and daughter-in-law guilty of adultery. Each received a 3-month prison sentence and a monetary fine. It seemed like the case had reached its conclusion, but at that time, Taiwan's legislative yuan was engaged in heated debates about whether the criminalization of adultery was unconstitutional. This development came at the perfect moment for Lai's grandfather, as his case was suspended. As a result, both he and his daughter-in-law escaped serving their sentences. Around this same period, Lai's intellectually disabled uncle fell seriously ill and passed away in 2008. After his son's death, Lai's grandfather and his daughter-in-law no longer had any moral constraints. He even went through legal procedures to adopt Lai, officially changing his status from grandson to son to settle inheritance matters. The transfer of assets took place discreetly but steadily over more than a decade. By the time Lai turned 18, all of the family's wealth was legally under his name, making him a young billionaire. By the end of April 2023, Lai's grandfather passed away at the age of 83. Because he had transferred his assets earlier, he successfully avoided the enormous inheritance tax. However, what no one expected was that just 1 week after his grandfather's death, Lai also passed away. In the end, the massive 500 million NT dollar fortune still ended up as inheritance. According to Taiwan's civil code, the inheritance priority follows this order: spouse, children, parents, and then siblings. However, Lai's siblings were only half-siblings from his father's side, so their inheritance rights were even lower on the priority list. Even if they pursued legal action to claim the inheritance and won, after deducting all the legal and attorney fees, the remaining amount would be negligible. Instead of wasting time on disputes, Lai's siblings chose to let things go and allow the situation to unfold naturally. However, the two parties with the largest claim to the fortune were unlikely to back down easily. Since Lai had no children, according to inheritance law, his fortune would be divided between his legal spouse, Ha, and his biological mother, Mrs. Tran. If nothing changed, they would each receive half. However, Mrs. Tran refused to accept this. She believed that her son was not only deceived into marriage but was also murdered. According to Mrs. Tran, Chia's father, who had handled all of their family's legal documents, had full knowledge of their wealth. She suspected that he encouraged Chia to seduce and marry Lai, then orchestrated his murder to seize the inheritance. Even half of the 500 million NT dollars was a fortune. This theory was supported by veteran forensic expert Mr. Cao Daicheng. With over 30 years of experience and more than 10,000 cases examined, he noticed something suspicious the moment he saw Lai's body. The first suspicious detail was the landing position of the body. If Lai had truly jumped, the trajectory should have formed a small parabolic arc, meaning his body should have landed at least 3 meters from the building. However, in reality, Lai's body was found right next to the building, only a few dozen centimeters away. This led Mr. Cao Daicheng to suspect foul play. Some forensic experts proposed an alternative theory. Lai may have stood on the outer balcony railing and jumped straight down, or he may have clung to the railing, suspended in midair, before falling when his strength gave out. If this were the case, his fall wouldn't follow a parabolic arc. However, near the second floor of the building, there was a protruding rain cover. If Lai had fallen straight down from a great height, the force of impact should have bounced him outward after hitting the rain cover, making his final landing position inconsistent with the actual findings. With authorization from the family, forensic expert Cao Daicheng obtained Lai's emergency and autopsy reports. He identified 4 major inconsistencies: 4 needle marks on Lai's right arm, a drag mark on his left wrist, strangulation marks on his neck, and bite bruises inside his lips. According to Mr. Cao, all of these injuries occurred before Lai's death. The most suspicious was the last mark, the strangulation mark and bite bruises, typically seen in cases of asphyxiation. This suggested that Lai might have been attacked, then injected with a drug that could paralyze the heart. While Lai was in a semi-conscious state, the perpetrator could have pushed him from a lower floor rather than from the 10th floor, where Chia was staying. Neighbors living on the 10th floor stated that on the day of the incident, they did not hear any arguments or sounds of a struggle. In his testimony, Chia claimed that after having a few drinks together, he went to the bathroom to wash his face. When he came out, Lai was gone. Assuming he had left, Chia thought nothing of it. Strangely, when the police arrived at the scene, Chia was not among the crowd that had gathered. However, when questioned by the police, he displayed a cold and detached demeanor when asked if he knew the victim. Chia remained completely silent, showing no emotion over the loss of his newlywed partner. Surveillance footage from the building's elevator showed both of them going up to the 10th floor at around 10 p.m. In the video, they did not speak or make any physical contact while in the elevator. The case gained widespread attention and became a hot topic of discussion. Due to mounting public pressure, the prosecutor's office was forced to release a new forensic report clarifying the suspicions surrounding Lai's death and the complex relationships in the case. On June 6th, the official forensic report confirmed that Lai's death was consistent with a high fall, with no evidence of homicide. The report also systematically refuted each of the suspicions previously raised by forensic expert Cao Daicheng. The prosecutor's report emphasized that Lai had multiple rib fractures and severe internal organ damage from the fall, contradicting Mr. Cao's earlier findings. Additionally, the police conducted over 1,000 toxicology tests on Lai's blood samples, all of which came back negative. His blood alcohol level was also 0. Regarding the needle marks on his arm, Forensic analysis suggested they were likely caused by intravenous injections administered by emergency medical personnel during resuscitation efforts. Similarly, the bite marks inside his mouth and bruises on his neck were concluded to be injuries sustained during emergency treatment, specifically when paramedics forcefully inserted an intubation tube. The police also found fingerprints, DNA traces, and scratch marks on the outer railing of the 10th floor balcony. Based on this evidence, they hypothesized that Lai had climbed over the railing but accidentally lost his grip and fell, without any external force involved. As for the unusual landing position, the police offered an explanation. There were impact marks on the rain cover below the building, while Lai's back also had 2 scratches that aligned with the sharp edges of the rain cover. Nearby tree branches showed signs of breakage, leading to the conclusion that Lai might have first hit the rain cover, bounced upward, collided with a tree branch, and then was further deflected before ultimately landing near the building. Based on these findings, on June 21st, the Taichung District Prosecutor's Office officially announced the closure of the case. They did not prosecute Ha's family due to a lack of direct evidence linking them to a crime. However, this ruling did not pacify public opinion. Instead, it further fueled controversy and outrage. Many questioned why, if Chia admitted that they had been drinking together, Lai's blood alcohol test showed a 0% alcohol level less than an hour later. This seemed impossible. Moreover, the most puzzling aspect was why Lai would choose to end his life at this moment, right after inheriting a massive fortune and getting married. What was the reason? In such cases, the victim would almost always leave a will or some kind of message. As public suspicion grew, both Chia and his father remained silent. It took over a month before they issued a brief statement to the media. In their statement, they emphasized that public speculation did not reflect the full truth, and that all conclusions should be based on judicial investigation results. They also mentioned Lai's mother, arguing that her statements were purely personal opinions and did not represent the objective reality of the case. Many unanswered questions still surrounded this case. In particular, the resurfacing of the affair between Lai's mother and his grandfather stirred public outrage once again. The latest news regarding this case revealed that, although the prosecutor's office decided not to indict Chia and his father, they also ruled that the marriage between Chia and Lai was invalid due to false registration information. This ruling meant that Chia's chances of inheriting half of the fortune were almost zero. However, Lai's mother refused to give up on holding Chia accountable. In March 2023, she authorized a lawyer to file an appeal against the decision not to prosecute Chia for murder. On May 28th, the Taichung Supreme People's Procuratorate reopened the case for further investigation. The case was officially reassigned on June 4th upon the completion of procedural documents. On June 28, 2024, the Taichung District Court found that Chia had engaged in a fraudulent marriage with a high school student named Lai and sentenced him to 1 year and 6 months in prison for falsifying documents. The sentence could not be converted to a fine. In other words, the marriage registration seen at the beginning of the video was fake. Chia had fabricated it with someone else who had the same name, Lai. The case remains appealable until May 23, 2025. The first instance court rejected Chia's appeal, upheld the initial verdict, and scheduled the final hearing for May 3, 2025. Chia was officially taken into custody to serve his sentence. In the end, after months of controversy, the secrets of Lai's family gradually unraveled. What began as a mysterious death evolved into a complex story of family, power, and dark ambitions. Lai, a young man, was crushed under immense pressure from his own family, ultimately paying the ultimate price, his life. Although the case has been legally closed, its repercussions will continue. The tangled relationships, lingering suspicions about Chia's actions, and the unanswered mysteries surrounding Lai's death remain unsolved. The individuals involved in this case not only faced legal consequences, but also had to endure lasting psychological and social repercussions for the rest of their lives. This concludes the video. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can bring you more strange and emotional stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.